Hello, the headlines at 5 o'clock. Storm Chandra's impact is being felt across Northern Ireland, with hundreds of schools closed, travel disrupted and flooding for some.
We need more help from DFI especially, rivers agencies especially. We need more people on the ground. Yes, if it rains overnight here, these houses, they'll not sleep a wink tonight, and that's so sad.
Also on the programme, Northern Ireland will become the first part of the UK to introduce new rules for new drivers. And a best friend of Noah Donohoe has told an inquest into his death that he had no reason to have any concerns about his friend's mental health. You can watch this programme on the BBC News NI website and react to anything you're hearing. You can text on 81771. This is Tuesday's Evening Extra. I'm Richard Morgan. Let's start with your BBC News at 5 o'clock with Amy Murray.
Thanks, Richard. Police have warned of significant disruption to travel as a result of flooding and damage caused by Storm Chandra. Northern Ireland Electricity says 3,800 homes are currently without power. A number of flights were cancelled or delayed this morning, and TransLink has warned of disruption to some services. Lanyon Place train station in Belfast city centre has been closed for the rest of today. Martin Fallon lives in Antrim, near Belfast International Airport.
We get all the water coming down from the airport, and there's a wee shuck that runs down, and at the end here there's a grating, and it just keeps getting covered in leaves, branches. It's never getting emptied, so water comes over the top and just floods straight through. And because we're at the bottom of the road, because it happens every now and again, and nothing's getting done about it.
A senior police officer says plans for Northern Ireland to bring in a graduated driver's licensing scheme will save lives. Northern Ireland is to become the first area of the UK to bring in the new rules, which places restrictions on new drivers in a bid to reduce the amount of fatal road crashes involving young people. The new rules include a minimum 6-month wait for learner drivers before they're allowed to take a practical test, and restrictions on nighttime driving and passenger numbers for those who have just passed the test. Chief Superintendent Sam Donaldson says we could learn from other places like Scandinavia, where it's been brought in successfully.
Young people who are 17, 18 and new drivers, regardless of what age, they don't recognise the risk the way perhaps some of us who are a little bit older do. So I absolutely welcome this graduated response, some restrictions in terms of who they can carry, times of day they can travel and things like that, because we've got to bring our new drivers on a slower journey to allow them to learn how to drive on the roads. 56
people died on Northern Ireland's roads last year. Stephen Doherty has been a paramedic for 13 years. He's been on the scene of more road crashes than he cares to remember.
There's one particular incident that'll live with me forever. A child that was hit by a car. It was involved in a hit and run. It was fatal pretty much on impact. You leave, you finish shift, you go home at the end of the day, and it's just white noise, it's just silence. But that's where, peer-to-peer support is really important. We turn up and we do a job and we do our best for those patients. Just because we're wearing a uniform doesn't make us invincible. We're not robots.
A couple from Londonderry say they believe an attack on their home last night was sectarian. Darian Moore said windows were smashed at the front of the house at Ebrington Oaks and the gang paint-bombed the home. 3 young children live in the house, the eldest of whom is a wheelchair user and has complex medical needs. Mr Moore believes his home was targeted because of his religion.
It was all over being a Catholic living in a Protestant area, but we come from a family that we don't bother nobody, and we've just been targeted, and I put it down to what I am and what my children are. It's shocking that in this day and age.
The former US President Joe Biden has spoken out about the immigration crackdown in Minneapolis, saying what's unfolded in the past month betrays Americans' most basic values. He's called for full, fair and transparent investigations into the fatal shooting of 2 protesters. And the director Chloe Zhao has broken a BAFTA record for the most nominated film directed by a woman. Hamnet has been shortlisted for 11 awards, including acting nominations for Irish film stars Jessie Buckley and Paul Mescal, who play the leads in the film. Leonardo DiCaprio's politically charged thriller One Battle After Another leads the field at this year's awards with 14 nominations. And that's all from me for now.
Amy, thank you very much. Hello and welcome to the programme on this wet and windy Tuesday evening. Richard with you until 6 o'clock. Over the next hour, we'll be talking quite a bit about road safety as Stormont's Department for Infrastructure announces major changes to the rules applied to new drivers. As part of that coverage, you'll be able to watch this programme on the BBC News NI website. The next hour is being streamed live, so come say hello if you're able. You'll also find us on the iPlayer and our YouTube channel. But we start this evening with Storm Chandra, which has certainly had an impact today. Travel's been disrupted, sporting fixtures have been postponed, and more than 350 schools were closed. Thousands of you were without power for a time. In County Fermanagh, a woman was taken to hospital after a tree fell on her car. Her injuries are not believed to be serious. And in County Antrim, there was flooding in a number of places, including near Belfast International Airport, where Martin Fallon spoke to Maria McCann.
Basically, we get all the water coming down from the airport, and there's a wee shuck that runs down, and at the end here there's a grating, and it just keeps getting covered in leaves, branches. It's never getting emptied, so water comes over the top and just floods straight through, and because we're at the bottom of the road, it's just...
Your wife was saying to me there that this is a regular occurrence, but she hasn't seen this as bad in a very long time.
No, we've not seen this for probably 6-7 years at least.
And you can see the water all gathered in your garden, but so far your house is intact.
Yeah, we're lucky. We're a couple of levels up, a couple of steps up, so we've not got flooded there. But
your neighbour is not so lucky?
No, that's been quite high on his front door. The back goes into a field, so most of the water's running off that way. But that's very deep. I mean, it's a good couple of foot.
And how is your neighbour? I mean, what is it like inside at the moment?
He's all right. He's slowly mopping a few things up, but yeah, he's okay. Yeah, normally the water just runs straight down into the field at the back, but not today.
Well, that was Martin Fallon speaking to Maria McCann. Meanwhile, houses in Colcavey and County Down have been at risk of flooding after a nearby river burst its banks. Let's cross to our reporter Michael Fitzpatrick, who's there for us this evening. Michael, what's it like?
Yes, good evening, Richard. I'm on a residential street just off the Colcavey Road near Hillsborough. This is known as the Old Mill area, and there is currently a small river running down the middle of the road past people's houses behind me. And I've been speaking to a resident here this evening who said it was much worse than this earlier today. He says he woke up at about 8 o'clock this morning and noticed the heavy flooding. And he said that he and other residents believe that the mill pond in Colcavey, which used to supply water to the old mill in this area, or a tributary of the River Lagan, has burst its banks and has turned into the torrent, which you can see here. Now, one of the neighbours then contacted a local farmer this morning who brought a telehandler in and cleared one of the riverbanks further down the street. That was to allow the water to escape. The resident I spoke to said up until that point the water was about a centimetre away from coming into residents' homes. Staff from Lisburn and Castlereagh Council have also been here today providing residents with sandbags to try to keep the water out of their properties. And there is more rain for later this evening, but residents here are hoping that they are now past the worst of this.
Yeah, and what about the impact elsewhere, Michael, as a result of this storm?
Well, as we know, thousands of homes and businesses are without power across Northern Ireland this evening, and more than 350 schools are closed as a result of Storm Chandra. An amber wind warning is in place for parts of Northern Ireland. That's until 9 o'clock tonight. And a yellow rain and wind warning for all of Northern Ireland remains in place until midnight. As of lunchtime, around 3,800 homes were without power, and that was down from a peak of 10,000. Northern Ireland Electricity says it has been escalating its response since the early hours of this morning. TransLink has also warned passengers that they should allow for delays and possible disruption to their journeys on trains and buses, and that there are speed restrictions in place on some railway lines. All flights as well to and from Belfast City Airport were cancelled this morning, with some disruption to flights continuing into this afternoon and this evening. And Belfast International Airport also said that the storm was causing delays to some of its flights. And on the roads as well, the storm has had an impact. The M1 motorway is closed westbound between Junction 6 at the St Field Road and Junction 8 at Blaris. That was due to heavy floodwater. And in Fermanagh, a woman was taken to hospital after a tree fell onto her car in Lisbon. We understand that the woman's injuries aren't believed to be serious. And looking ahead to tomorrow, as we know, those weather warnings for today and at midnight, of course, but the Met Office has also issued an ice warning for Northern Ireland, and that kicks in from 3 a.m. tomorrow.
Michael, thank you. That's our reporter, Michael Fitzpatrick, live in Colcavey for us this evening. He'll be on BBC Newsline at 6:30. You'll be able to see some of that flooding for yourself. And we will have a full weather forecast with Jeff just after 5:30 on the programme. But at 5:10 this Tuesday evening, Northern Ireland is to become the first part of the UK to introduce new rules for new drivers in a bid to reduce fatal road crashes involving young people. The rules, due to be introduced in October, are aimed at 17 to 23-year-olds and will change how people learn to drive. They include a 6-month wait for learner drivers before taking a practical test. Well, the Infrastructure Minister, Liz Kimmins, told Good Morning Ulster that young drivers are disproportionately represented in serious collision statistics.
I think there's very few families right across the north, right across this island, who haven't been touched in some way by the devastating impact of a road traffic collision. I think it's incumbent on us all that we do take action to try and bring those numbers down, and every single life lost is one too many. So for me, it's about looking at what else can we do and continually narrowing those gaps that can lead to collisions and essentially then leading to fatalities. For me, I think the evidence base is there that we need to try and find ways to address that. And it isn't about restricting drivers or making it more difficult for young and new drivers, but it's actually about improving safety for everyone, including drivers themselves.
Well, for the first 6 months after passing their test, new drivers up to the age of 24 are only permitted to have one passenger aged between 14 and 20 in their car between the hours of 11 p.m. and 6 a.m. That restriction would not include immediate family members and does not apply if someone aged 21 or over who has held a licence for at least 3 years is sitting in the front seat. So what do young people make of the change? We asked teenagers at St Mark's High School in Warrenpoint.
Well, for most young drivers, it'd probably be annoying that you're only allowed one of your friends at night, but it is safer because if you've a car load of boys your age, you're going to get distracted. The worst could happen, like if you're getting distracted while driving.
It's not too good. Like you'd be like upset to begin with, but you know it's for the greater good overall, because then you wouldn't be getting distracted as much if like your friends were sitting beside you trying to show you something.
The main sort of aspect when you want to pass your test, you want to go out, have the freedom to go out and spend time with your friends. You know what I mean? So it'll definitely be a big change.
Well, I'm pleased to say in studio this evening is Chief Superintendent Sam Donaldson, who oversees road safety policing operations. Thank you for coming in, and we will get into the graduated licence in just a moment, but I can't help but ask you on a day like today, it's much easier to get the message across that you take care on our roads when there's a storm, when there's bad weather warnings, but how do you do that on all of those other days when those collisions are still happening on our roads, even if the conditions are perfect?
I think the first thing I would say, Richard, is just to pay some tribute to those folks that are out there today dealing with that. Emergency services, partners, local government, people like that. So really, really challenging day. I've been on the roads today and I've noticed people driving a little bit slower, not as much traffic on the road. And there's something here around on a day like this when the traffic is a little bit reduced, but the weather's really, really bad. People are driving a little bit safer. So the message is very simple. Why do we not think like that every single day of the year? Because our roads are a dangerous place 365 days of the year. And it does concern me a little that people think they're only dangerous when there's flooding or really, really bad weather. And the Minister touched on it earlier on about how many people have lost their lives on our roads. And 56 people last year, 69 the year before that, 71 the year before that. Simple maths says 200 people. And you nearly need to take that in. 200 people in the last 3 years have lost their lives in our roads. 4 more people already this year. And those are homes that'll never be the same again. So I don't know, to answer your question, why do people not realise that there's risk? I think part of it is people think it's never going to happen to me. It's always going to happen to somebody else. And I'd be fairly sure that all 200 people who didn't come home went out thinking exactly the same.
So with that in mind, how does the PSNI think this change, this announcement today, will impact our roads, this graduated licence scheme?
In simple terms, we welcome it. This is a move that is the right thing to do for our community. We've been working with DFI for some time around this, engaging with them around what it might look like. Even this morning I met with some DVA colleagues to chat through exactly what enforcement would look like. And looking backwards, if you think over the last number of years, if graduated driving licences had been in force and had been in play, would some of our young people be alive today? And would some other drivers and some other road users be alive today? The simple answer is yes, they absolutely would. And in my opinion, the sooner we can get this in, the better. We're talking about October of this year. And the sooner we can get it in and start to change the culture. But this is not simply about an engineering solution. We talk in road safety about the classic 3 E's. The engineering that is being done here is changing the law. The education which starts now is about thinking differently when you're on the road, especially if you're a young person. And then PSNI with our partners will obviously do enforcement in due course. And those 3 E's have to go together.
But are we at risk here of demonising young people by saying we are targeting you with this graduated licence scheme? We think it is you that poses a danger on our roads.
Well, I certainly wouldn't use the term demonising, but I just listened to the interviews there, and young people will have different views. And I'm confident that when I was 17, I would have taken the view that there is no further requirement for me to be tested here. I'm ready to drive. And I'm 100% sure that many young people who've been through the assessment, the driving test, and they think they're fantastic drivers, and they're not. And it's only with hindsight that you realise that you've so much more to learn when you're on the road. So I don't think we're demonising. I think we're recognising the risk, and the Minister alluded to the fact that there's a disproportionate risk here. And young people, and it's not just about young people, by the way, it's important to say this is about inexperienced drivers as well. So perhaps people a little bit older who've decided, well, I think it's about time I learned to drive. So it's not just about young people, it's about inexperienced drivers. I absolutely welcome it. I'm delighted to see that we're moving in that direction, and I'm looking forward to working with DFI colleagues and others around how we implement it. And more importantly, Richard, how do we change the culture? How do we get our young people thinking in a different way? And I would appeal tonight that if you're a parent of a child, and I'm a parent, and I can still recall my son driving off in my car for the first time and shuddering with horror. If you're a parent, have you had this conversation with your kids? Have you talked to them about how dangerous the roads are, how they should conduct themselves? And
because we have that conversation with our kids, don't we? Or we plan to, about strangers or about internet safety, especially in this day and age. But do you think we just take driving for granted, that it's a rite of passage and it's not something that can cause harm, when in fact it can cause death or serious injury?
Yeah, well, I've heard that term a couple of times today, and thank you to the BBC for running so much today around road safety. It's fantastic to communicate those messages, but I've heard that term rite of passage mentioned a few times. No one has a right to be on a road and drive whatever way they like. There are pedestrians, cyclists, motorcyclists, other road users. We've got to respect other people on the road, and if in bringing in a graduated driving licence, it makes our young people more prepared to recognise risk and better prepared to be able to stay safe themselves and with their friends and their peers and indeed other road users. This can only be a good thing for Northern Ireland. And I would just ask people, if you're driving a car right now, if you're at home, if you're listening, if you have children who are either already driving or close to driving, have the conversation with them around the seriousness of what they're about to do or the seriousness of what they're already doing. Someone described a vehicle to me today as a lethal weapon. And when you think it through, you know, you're sitting behind the wheel of a car with very little experience, and off you go, and not long after you've passed your test, you're potentially on your own. You are in possession of a lethal weapon, and all you got to do is meet some of the families. And I've heard some over the last number of days, and I've met them down through the years. And if you don't want to listen to me, that's fine. But would you please listen to some of the families who've been through this, because their lives will never, ever be the same again, and they can't turn back time.
You know, many of us here on the roads will describe what might have been near misses or how some people have used the roads around us. And you also can't help but wonder, if you had more people, more officers, more patrols out on the ground, that maybe that would act as a deterrent, because it would be harder for people to think, I'll get away with overtaking illegally, I'll get away with going this speed. Are you, given the pressures on policing, are you able to stay on top of road safety as much as you would like to be able to?
I would love more resources. I would love more money. And I'm sure if my Chief Constable's listening right now, he would be disappointed if I didn't say that. But I'm not going to focus on that. You know, we have a police service. We have dedicated road policing officers. We have people in every district that take road safety seriously and are out there every single day speaking to people about the standard of their driving. So, yeah, I'd love more, but you know, it's about making the most of what we have. And more importantly, I've already talked about the 3 E's, and enforcement is only the third part of that. So there's an education piece here, there's an engineering piece. And, you know, even the more I think about it, enforcement is not just about police enforcement. It's about a parent or another responsible young person saying, stop driving like that. Pull over, because I'd like to get out of the car, because I don't feel safe in the car right now with you. And that's where enforcement starts. And think about all those youth leaders and people who have way more influence on young people than I do. You know, just stop, think, what are the consequences here? If I continue to behave the way I'm behaving on the roads, if I continue to drive the way I'm driving, what are the consequences for me and for my friends in the back of the car or for other road users? And that's the first part of enforcement, where you stop and you think, what am I doing here and what might happen to me or someone else?
Yeah, something for us all to think about this evening. Sam Donaldson, thank you so much for coming in to the studio tonight. That's Chief Superintendent Sam Donaldson, who oversees road safety policing operations. More of that interview you'll be able to find on our live page on the BBC News NI website. You'll also be able to watch this programme on the website and on the iPlayer and our YouTube channel. Also in studio this evening, Karen McShane, infrastructure expert, who was listening to that very closely. And you know, we have you here because some people will often say that's a dangerous road, you know, this is one of the most dangerous roads, but actually the statistics tell us that it's driver error that is the leading cause of serious or fatal collisions on our roads. Karen?
It is. Roads don't kill people. It's the drivers that cause the accidents or the incidents. And one of the big causes that Sam's colleagues will tell us is that it's inattention or attention diverted is one of the key elements where you lose control of your vehicle because you're not paying attention to those particular conditions. The conditions are important. Today, we've got some really difficult conditions out there on the road network. Over the last week, I have noticed a significant increase in the breakup of the surface of the road. We've had an increase in potholes. And certainly in conditions like this, when you try to brake and you hit one of those, it's not going to slow you down. So it's really important to pay attention out on the roads today. Sam was quite right. We need to thank the department officials who are out there in the really difficult conditions trying to keep everything moving today. And they're doing a great job in doing that. Sam mentioned there the 3 E's. Engineering, there's definitely an engineering aspect to how we bring in that new legislation. And I remember back in Northern Ireland when we had the R plates, other parts of these islands didn't have that particular plate for new drivers who have passed their test. That did one thing, it restricted those drivers to certain conditions on the road network. But it said to me as a driver, when I approached somebody like that, I knew they were restricted to 45 miles an hour. I knew I had to be careful that this person didn't have the experience of a more of somebody that had more driving experience, and I needed to be careful just as to how that vehicle was manoeuvring. So I do welcome the changes today. I have no doubt that it will save lives.
And Sam also mentioned education, and for many of us, certain songs invoke memories of graphic television ad campaigns aimed at reducing deaths and serious injuries on our roads. They were so impactful that many were not shown until after the watershed, 9 p.m. Well, I've been taking a look back at some of those ads and speaking to one of the key players involved, Julianne Bailey of Lyle Bailey International, and a warning: some of you might find what we are about to play distressing.
Shall I tell you about my life?
A catchy song, a compelling story, then carnage.
Nobody had ever seen anything like this before. This shock strategy was brand new. People in Northern Ireland and across the world really hadn't seen anything like it.
Young men think they're great drivers. Therefore, drive too fast to cope with the unexpected.
Really, there were two core psychological problems. One was complacency. As a society, we'd become really complacent. We were totally anaesthetised to the dangers on the road, and it's almost as if when people heard about deaths and serious injuries, they were just statistics. The second problem was that road safety was always somebody else's problem. So it was the Sunday driver, it was the young driver, it was the old driver, it was the female driver. It was always somebody else's problem.
They say the guy without the seatbelt did the damage.
But more often than not, we used music in an ironic sense. So, for example, if you think of Damage, which was the seatbelt ad, which first aired in 2001.
This is Michael. Today he's going to hit his girlfriend so hard she ends up with permanent brain damage.
It's doubly ironic because we mixed that with a track by Captain and Tennille, which said, "Do that to me one more time." When this man was creating carnage within the confines of the car.
The moment you put that helmet on, you're free. All your problems go away. Nothing clears your head like it. You're buzzing. You're in control. Open roads. You open up. You leave it all behind because you're always thinking ahead.
And now, in 2026, a new campaign is in the works. At a casting call in Belfast, we get a hint of what to expect.
My name's Paul Bowen. I'm Executive Creative Director with Ardmore Advertising. We do the current campaigns for Department for Infrastructure. We're creating two campaigns at the moment. One is an anti-speeding campaign, and the main point that we'll be getting across in what we're creating is essentially, regardless of any external factors, it's always speed that is going to impact the danger of the driving or the outcomes. And the second is about driver behaviour. And it's essentially, it boils down to selfish driving behaviour costs lives.
And how much of this is building on what we've seen in the past, particularly in the 90s and noughties? We had a real shock factor on our television screens.
We can't shock in the same manner that they did back then because the channels are so much more expansive, which gives us an opportunity because our touch points are much greater. So we have to shock by making people care, and we've got to make a connection because people nowadays, you know, with so much stimulus around them, they need to understand what the challenge is, what the solution can be, and in order to engage with that, they've got to give a damn about it. It essentially comes down to the helping save lives on the road. That's the cold hard facts of it. We will be doing research of how these have landed, how they're researching, you know, where are they most powerful. We'll be doing all of that. The hardest figures are going to be saving lives.
Well, one problem that we have is that we have a huge open rural road network. If you're in the rest of the UK, you're much more likely to meet gridlock. And I think that we have this, you know, massive rural network. On top of that, you know, we're a race-mad, rally-mad culture. And again, there's so many issues about just the whole metaphor, the allure of the road as a metaphor. You know, it represents freedom, it represents independence, it represents sunsets, getting the girl. It's all highly romanticised. But the problem is, in the midst of that, the danger is minimised.
Julianne Bailey there ending that report. As I look back at some of those hard-hitting ads, that does feed into, I suppose, the education element that Sam Donaldson was talking about there. But Karen McShane, there is also what Julianne spoke about there at the end. There is that element of just our road network here and how that may play into how some people treat our roads, how some people drive.
Exactly. Even in some of those rural networks, people think that they're not going to get caught doing something, so they're not driving in accordance with the rules or the conditions. And what we find is a lot of those rural road networks have evolved over the last 100 years. They haven't been designed to modern engineering standards, yet they're still applicable to the national speed limit. So Liz Cummins has put out a consultation paper looking at the introduction of changing some of the speeds on some of our roads. We have some discussion on 20 mile per hour zones, and we have a discussion on reducing the speed limit in those more rural roads. The reason for that is that the severity of an accident is dependent on the speed that accident occurs at. So you can be significantly more harm caused at a higher speed in a collision.
Well, Karen, you're going to stay with us until 6 o'clock, so you can continue to follow our coverage on this day dedicated to road safety in Northern Ireland across BBC News NI. But we will pause for just a moment at 5:31 to get a summary of the news. Here's Amy Murray.
Northern Ireland is to become the first area of the UK to introduce new rules for new drivers in a bid to reduce fatal road crashes involving young people. The rules include a minimum 6-month wait for learner drivers before they're allowed to take a practical test, and restrictions on nighttime driving and passenger numbers for those who have just passed the test. 56 people died on Northern Ireland's roads last year. Police have warned of significant disruption to travel as a result of flooding and damage caused by Storm Chandra. Northern Ireland Electricity says 3,800 homes are currently without power. A number of flights were cancelled or delayed this morning, and Translink has warned of disruption to some services. Lanyon Place train station in Belfast city centre has been closed for the rest of today. The jury in the Noah Donohoe inquest have for the first time been shown CCTV evidence of his bike journey through the city. The footage shows Noah leaving his home on Fitzroy Avenue in South Belfast in the afternoon of the 21st of June 2020. The inquest continues. The former US President Joe Biden has called for a full, fair and transparent investigation into the fatal shooting of 2 protesters in Minneapolis. Mr. Biden said what's unfolded in the past month betrays Americans' most basic values. And the director Chloe Zhao has broken a BAFTA record for the most nominated film directed by a woman. Hamnet has been shortlisted for 11 awards, including acting nominations for the Irish film stars Jessie Buckley and Paul Mescal. Leonardo DiCaprio's politically charged thriller One Battle After Another leads the field at this year's awards with 14 nominations. And that's all from me for now.
Amy, thank you. Yeah, we'll be talking about the BAFTAs just before 6 o'clock. And also just to let you know that the M1 westbound, that has reopened after that earlier closure due to flooding. And the latest that we have from NIE Networks is that about 2,000 customers are still without power as a result of the weather, because it has been, Jeff, as you put it, a wild day out there.
It really has. Quite a remarkable day, and actually some significant records fallen. I just want to point you towards Kate's Bridge. No stranger to breaking records there. But in the 24 hours from 9 o'clock on Monday morning to 9 o'clock this morning, 100.8 millimetres of rain recorded at the weather station there. That is just shy of a month's worth of rainfall in a single day. So it has been an absolutely torrential day of weather. It is going to stay wet and windy through this evening, and if you thought the winds had fallen a bit lighter through the middle of the day, they are going to pick up again, a slight shift in the direction of that through the first part of the night. So that yellow severe weather warning for wind and rain remains active across the whole of Northern Ireland until midnight tonight, but the amber warning for the strongest winds along the east coast, that expires at 9 p.m. So it's staying squally as we go overnight tonight. It's going to see some fairly hefty downpours, particularly through the first half of the night. Then the rain stops, then the sky is clear, and without that blanket of cloud cover, the temperatures are really going to drop. And that means with all of that water, all that runoff from the fields, a sudden drop in temperature means there is a risk of ice, so we have another weather warning from 3 o'clock tomorrow morning, this time for ice, and it is going to be almost impossible for the road service to grit everywhere. And when you've got that much surface water running off the fields, the salt is not nearly as effective as in other times. So do take care if you're on the roads tomorrow morning. It does set us up for a better day tomorrow, drier with some lighter winds. After that chilly start, we will see a few showers through the day. Still blustery, highs of 8 or 9 degrees, but much less rain than we will have seen today.
Well, that's something. Jeff, thank you very much. A couple of texts to bring you on 81771. Bill says, I really welcome the new laws for new drivers. As a father of a 15-year-old who will be impacted by them, I think they'll definitely make a difference and hopefully reduce accidents. But Bill says he takes exception to cars being labelled by many contributors today as lethal weapons. They are tools that, if used incorrectly, can cause death or serious injuries, but they are certainly not weapons. And Martin in Derry says, I cannot see the point in introducing new traffic legislation when the current regulations are not being enforced. Keep those coming on 81771. You're listening to Evening Extra on BBC Radio Ulster, Radio Foyle and BBC Sounds. You can also watch the programme on the BBC News NI website today and on the iPlayer and our YouTube channel. At 25 to 6, the jury in the Noah Donohoe inquest have been shown CCTV evidence of his bike journey through the city for the first time. It shows Noah leaving his home on Fitzroy Avenue in South Belfast on the afternoon of the 21st of June 2020. Eve Rosado was following the inquest for us today and is here now. 2 witnesses today, Eve. The first, a very close friend of Noah's.
Yeah, Richard. Charlie Rocks, a best friend, he would have been described as, of Noah's. They knew each other from St Malachy's College. Similarly to yesterday, a lot of the evidence focused on the messages and online conversation the boys had during the weeks and months before Noah's disappearance, and that was primarily during a period of lockdown. We get a real sense of the sheer amount of contact this group of teenagers were having with each other during that time period. They were sometimes in contact on a Skype call, say, for hours, with one of them typing and one of them talking, in group chats, as I said. We heard from statements taken from Charlie after Noah's disappearance, and then in questioning there was a focus on what was called Noah's transitional period in his mental health. Now, Charlie Rock said from his point of view that was a good thing for Noah, and he didn't think it was unusual for a young person to have that kind of experience, that personal examination of themselves. He said he wasn't aware of any external pressure when he was asked, and though it was clear that Noah was going through something, his only concern for his friend was that he would be able to listen to him and support him. There was discussion about a message from Noah some weeks before his death in which he talked about sad boy hours, which is a term that people might use online. Charlie Rocks explained what it meant. He said it's just feeling a bit down, a bit blue. But again, it was nothing he was particularly concerned about. And it was pointed out that during many of the conversations the friends had in groups and private chats, they moved from discussing their emotions to music, TV, politics, girls, and back again at speed. He said he had no reason to be concerned about Noah's mental health, and he didn't think lockdown had got to Noah, and he agreed that some days were better than others for all the friends during that time.
A book that was in Noah's possession was also discussed at the inquest today, Eve.
Yeah, Charlie Rocks was asked about a self-help book that Noah had been reading. It was called 12 Rules for Life by Jordan Peterson. And Charlie said the book had certainly had an impact on Noah, and that was for sure. He believed the book had changed Noah's mindset and had helped him in a good way, is how he described it. He was asked if Noah seemed particularly obsessed with Peterson, and he said no. He said Noah had offered him the book, but he declined because he wasn't interested in reading it, and that at around this time, in the weeks before his disappearance, Noah was definitely changing, being more open, and Charlie said he thought that was great.
There were questions too about Noah's geographic awareness of Belfast.
Yeah, well, we know obviously Noah lived in South Belfast, Richard. Charlie was asked if Noah would have had a wider knowledge of North Belfast, and Charlie said, well, he would have known the Antrim Road because that's where their school was, and around the waterworks, which was close to the school, but he had no reason to think Noah knew any more than that. He was asked, would he have known around the Shore Road area, and he said he wouldn't have any reason to believe that Noah would have had any interest in that area. That was, of course, where Noah was last seen and where his body was found.
And just tell us then about the CCTV of Noah cycling through the city, which was shown in court for the first time. That was this afternoon.
Yeah, that was very late this afternoon, just before we finished for the day. It's essentially a patchwork of different pieces of CCTV shown one after another, plotting Noah's journey, essentially. And it begins as he manoeuvres his bicycle out of his flat onto Fitzroy Avenue. We then see him cycling through the city centre on Royal Avenue and then on to North Belfast. And the footage comes from all different places, from shops, from public CCTV, private homes. In the final piece of footage, Noah can be seen cycling without any clothes on, and his mother, Noah Donohoe, had left the coroner's courtroom while that footage was played, and she then returned immediately afterwards. The video was shown just before we got evidence from a witness who had called the police herself in the days after Noah's disappearance to say she believed she had seen Noah. Her police statement then wasn't taken until 10 months later. She said she had seen a young male crouching on the ground in North Belfast, that he got up quickly, he looked around as if embarrassed, and then cycled on. She told the court she didn't notice anything about him that made her think he was hurt. He seemed steady enough. And the inquest continues, Richard.
Eve, thank you. That's our reporter Eve Rosado there with the very latest. You can stay across the inquest and catch up on what's happened so far on the State of Us podcast. It's available on BBC Sounds or wherever you get your podcasts. You'll also be able to see that on the BBC News NI YouTube channel. Now, obviously, across the day and this programme, we've been looking at road safety. And of course, while the most important thing is the well-being of motorists, cyclists, the pedestrians, all of you who use our roads, there are some really significant economic sides to road safety that you might not immediately think of. Our business correspondent, Patrick Fee, is here, and you can tell us just a bit more about some of those impacts.
Evening, Richard. You're absolutely right. Safety is obviously the priority in these discussions, but the impacts of road safety on people's wallets come through in all sorts of different ways. The main way it will affect a lot of people listening, especially those who are listening as they're driving home, is through the cost of their car insurance. And that's especially true for young drivers. Young drivers in Northern Ireland are paying more for their car insurance than their equivalents in any other part of the UK outside of London. An average cost of more than £1,400 if you're aged between 17 and 24. And the news there is only getting worse. While other age groups here are seeing their premiums fall in recent months, analysis from Compare NI found that prices for young drivers in NI have kept on rising. At the end of 2025, those prices jumped again by £152. That's the biggest rise of any UK region. We caught up with one of those young drivers, Oscar Scullion. He passed his test last December, and even with a significant bill, he feels he's now getting off pretty lightly.
Looking through the insurances, obviously they were all quite high, and I mean that's what I'm expecting. But I did find that a lot of them were quite high in comparison to what I have now. I'm currently on a combined insurance with my two brothers, and that in my hour plates that was around 2,600, and now that I'm off my hour plates, it's dropped to around 2,200. And I mean, I just found that was the best way to save money, a bit of money, because we are all combined, and it's a slight saving on us, and like spending the whole. It could have been something like $3,000 for all of us, instead of now it's down to 2,300. It is still quite high, because I mean that's around 700 a head, and even with the current prices that I see around 900, 1,400 for one person, dropping down to 700 can be a big difference. But again, it is still quite a large sum of money.
Yeah, I can't really complain about my insurance costs, can I? But why is it, Paddy, that our costs are just so high compared to other parts of the UK?
Well, it's a good question. Part of the reason is to do with our insurance market. Fewer insurance firms operate here than in other parts of the UK, which means less competition, and that can mean higher prices for consumers. But insurers say that we also have higher repair and legal costs here, and that can also drive up prices. Here's Mark Shepherd from the Association of British Insurers.
A claim in Northern Ireland, for example, cost insurers over £6,500, and that compares to under £5,000 for the UK average. And that's partly down to young or inexperienced drivers who are more likely to be involved statistically in a road traffic collision. So with a poorer road safety record and the higher costs of claims when road traffic collisions do occur, that impacts on premiums in the region, and that can be exacerbated for young or inexperienced drivers.
And just finally, we're not all treated the same, are we? There's a bit of a postcode lottery going on here.
I'm afraid so, and the difference can actually be pretty staggering. Experts have told us that those in urban areas tend to have higher premiums than people living in rural areas, and that is borne out by the data. Among 18-year-olds in Northern Ireland, if you're living in Ards and North Down, then you're one of the lucky ones. You have the lowest premiums. They're still steep enough at just over £2,000. But if you're 18 and you live in Belfast, it's much, much worse. You're paying more than 150% as much on average as some of your peers. That's an extra £1,000. You can actually find a full interactive map of insurance cost by age and council area up on our website now. But we also spoke to Davy Jackson. He's from the charity Road Safe NI. He has sympathy for young people here facing higher costs and has shared some tips on how to get those premiums down.
I don't think it's fair that they're paying higher than the UK average. I know insurance is down to risk and they look at different areas, goes by postcode, so a lot can affect that. But there's a lot young people can do to help bring the price of their premiums down. Depending on the car they buy, if they're buying high-powered cars with 2 and 3 litre engine, as opposed to something with a 1 or 1.2 litre engine, can make a difference. If where they're parking their car at night, if they're in a driveway or in their own garage, it can bring the price down. But also telematics is a huge thing here, where lots of insurance companies offer telemetry systems, and these are wired to their cars and their driving's monitored. And if the young people are willing to use these telemetry systems, they can get discount on their insurance. So there are things they can do to bring the price of that insurance down.
Davy Simpson from Road Safe NI is speaking to our business correspondent Patrick Fee there. Karen McShane, infrastructure expert, is still with us. And while we're talking about money and insurance premiums, what about the money, the funding for road maintenance? Does that play into road safety, do you think, when it comes to the state of our roads?
Absolutely, Richard. What we try to aspire to in the engineering side of road design is to have a good quality surface with a high skid resistance. And that's what actually helps stop the car whenever you've got an incident. If we have a road that's full of potholes where that surface is rutted, as we see around some of our city centre streets, if we've had service openings where it hasn't been reinstated properly, we find that deteriorates and it causes a position on the road where you can't achieve that stopping distance. And that's one of the factors that the department use, testing that surface to see what its condition is when they decide how to allocate repair funding to a particular section of road. The difficulty that we have is that every year for over the last 10 years, the maintenance budget that is required to carry out that work has been significantly below the required funding that is required. Last year it was only about a third. So we are
as costs go up.
As costs go up, yeah. And the difficulty with that is that we're doing a lot of emergency repairs, which is not a very cost-effective way of spending that fund, because you're going in at a high cost to do a small repair, and it's more cost-effective to do a proper scheme in the first place.
And that's about maintenance, but what about upgrades? What about major projects like the A5, like the A1? People will say those are dangerous roads. We've had the conversation to say, well, in the majority of cases, it is driver error that causes crashes, but you can't help but talk about some of those major upgrades that have been in the pipeline for a very long time.
There has been a programme of works for decades. A lot of our development plans identified schemes that needed to come forward. The A5 is one of those schemes. The difficulty with the A5, and even in some instances the A1 dual carriageway, we have a lot of incidents that take place because the volume of traffic has increased. There's a lot more conflicts taking place, for example, on increased right turning movements, increased agricultural vehicle on that road because they don't have an alternative choice. So it's very difficult that we need to invest in those routes to solve an existing problem. But as well as that, the department have a very strong active travel ethos currently. And what we're finding is in a lot of the rural areas, we don't have footpaths. We don't have cycling facilities. So we've seen last year numbers of incidents where pedestrians, cyclists, vulnerable users have tragically lost their lives as a result of not having those facilities in place. Likewise, we're encouraging people to use public transport. That does a number of things. One, it reduces the amount of miles that are driven on the road, which reduces that level of risk. But the difficulty is those public transport services get caught on those congested roads, and we need to be able to putting in that infrastructure to allow our public transport services to provide that necessary linkage that we need for the future.
But you need a lot of money to do that.
We need a lot of money. The difficulty is we can do lots of things with the funding that we have. And I'll give you an example. In Wales, they introduced a 20 mile per hour speed limit through some of the towns. That was a very low cost initiative because it was a matter of putting up some signs and some advertising. And what they found from that was a number of positives and a number of negatives. But one of the big positives was that the incidents that occurred reduced because people were reacting, and because they were going at a slower speed, they could avoid that particular incident. So there was a reduction in the incidents. But one of the most notable things, there was a reduction in the severity of the accidents. So we can look at the numbers of fatalities and the difficulties that occurred. If you hit somebody at 20 miles an hour, there's a higher chance that they're going to survive. We touched earlier on the statistics. Our good friend Sam there from PSNI, Sam Donaldson, told us there were 57 fatalities last year, approximately 200 over the last 3 years, which if a Boeing 747 crashed today, it would be all over the news. We'd be talking about the 200 fatalities. We don't talk about these things. The difficulty that we have going forward is we want to reduce that. We talk about the fatalities, but we also look at serious injuries and injuries. And the 57 is the tip of the pyramid. As you go down that pyramid, the number of serious injuries increases, the number of injuries increases even more. And if we can stop the fatalities, we also stop those serious injuries and injuries occurring as well.
And some of those serious injuries have such an impact on families that lasts many years, if not forever. Karen McShane, thank you very much for your insight there. That's Karen McShane, infrastructure expert, contributing this evening as we talk about road safety across BBC News NI. Now it's 9 minutes to 6 o'clock this Tuesday evening. Utterly hopeless. That's how the prosecution case against a Belfast businessman accused of fraud has been described in court. A barrister representing Frank Cushnahan said his client had helped to save the Northern Ireland economy after the financial crash in 2008 and was completely innocent. The 84-year-old has been on trial since September in relation to his role as an advisor to the National Asset Management Agency, known as NAMA, which was set up after the property crash. Let's get more from our correspondent, Mark Simpson, who's been following this. Hi, Mark.
Evening.
Is this the first time we've heard in detail from the defence?
Yes, and we're 4 months into this trial. The reason for that is the fact, Richard, that Frank Cushnahan turned down the chance to give evidence himself. All we've heard from the defence is contributions when it comes to cross-examination. But today, the defence summed up their case, and essentially, as you've said, what they did was rubbish, and that word was used time and again by the defence barrister, rubbish the prosecution case, saying it was utterly hopeless. Mr. Cushnahan was completely innocent. But the defence barrister also addressed that question. Well, why didn't he then give evidence? And he said to the jury, the defence barrister, that the jury should not be surprised that a man aged 84 decided not to go into the witness box. He said it was up to the prosecution to prove their case, and he said quite firmly he felt that they hadn't.
So what did the defence barrister say about the character of Frank Cushnahan?
He talked about him for 60-odd years in business in Belfast and beyond, having an unblemished record in terms of service to business, including the period that this court case covers, the aftermath of the financial crash in 2008, the setting up of NAMA to try and deal with the Northern Ireland loan book and all of those bad loans. He said, this defence barrister, Frank O'Donoghue KC, said that Frank Cushnahan played a huge role in getting Northern Ireland off its knees, saving the Northern Ireland economy, but he did it all within the law. There was no conflict of interest with anything that he had to do with NAMA. And in terms of this investigation and hence this trial since September, and I quote the defence barrister, he said, Frank Cushnahan has been living a life of character assassination, interrogation, prosecution, and some might say persecution for the last 10 years.
So, Mark, is this trial nearly over?
It is nearly over. it could potentially be over in the coming days, because we expect the defence to finish their closing speech tomorrow. Then the judge will sum up, and then it's over to the jury.
Mark Simpson there with the very latest. Thank you. We're fast approaching 5 to 6 this Tuesday evening. Awards season is in full swing, and the latest batch of nominations were announced today. This time, it's the BAFTAs.
This year, 221 films were submitted for consideration, and 82 films made the BAFTA longlist. Today, we have the privilege of announcing which films and performers will progress to the final round of voting. These are the very best films of 2025.
Well, for the cast and crew of Hamnet, they've bagged 11 nominations, making it the most nominated film by a female director in BAFTA's history. This includes nods for Paul Mescal and Jessie Buckley for their roles, and adapted screenplay for author Maggie O'Farrell. Leonardo DiCaprio's politically charged thriller One Battle After Another, it leads with 14 nominations, followed closely by vampire horror Sinners with 13. Well, Siobhan Sinnott is a BAFTA voter and was watching the announcement earlier today. Siobhan, what's your big takeaway today?
A lot of love being spread in some unexpected places, I think. I mean, certainly the big hitters got their due. One Battle After Another has always been a favourite this award season. The same goes for Sinners. Interesting to see that the BAFTAs seem to like one nomination more than the Oscars did. But a very good showing for Ireland, as you say. Paul Mescal up for Best Supporting Actor. Jessie Buckley, who looks unstoppable as for the Best Actress category. She's been winning it in just about every place that she showed up. And also, good news for Cillian Murphy. His film, very much a passion project, Steve, is up for Outstanding British Film, as is Pillion, which I liked very much, but I'm not sure I can say very much about it before The Watershed.
No, I don't think you can, Siobhan, to be fair. But is this Paul Mescal's best chance then? Because there's been a bit of commentary that he's been fairly overlooked in terms of his role in Hamnet, while his co-star Jessie Buckley, as you say, has been running away with all the awards.
Yeah, I mean, this is certainly a shot. But if you look in the Best Supporting Actor category, I mean, it's a tough one. You're up there with Benicio del Toro for One Battle After Another. You've got Jacob Elordi for Frankenstein, and Peter Mullen for I Swear. I Swear is an interesting one. It's one of those films that, like Steve, has cut through at BAFTA level, if not at Oscar level. So I Swear is the film very much about the Tourette sufferer John Davidson, who refused to let his condition limit his life, and it's had 4 or 5 nominations, which shows that there are significant differences between BAFTA voters and Oscar voters at some point once you dig into the detail.
How do you think Timothée Chalamet will fare in his role as Marty Supreme? There's been a huge PR campaign around that, and he hasn't been shy about his desire to be one of the greats.
Yeah, it's funny because I think he's doing the Marty Supreme character as he does the awards round, which is a bit method, but Marty Supreme is a very arrogant ping pong champion, and I think that Timothée Chalamet is having fun taking that character on the awards circuit as well. I really liked Marty Supreme. It's a bit about ping pong, sure, but it's also about the American dream. He's a very ruthless guy. He is very transactional, and yet he is such an engaging, interesting character that you can't help but root for him, awful though he may be.
If there was one out of the best films, Hamnet, Marty Supreme, One Battle After Another, Sentimental Value, or Sinners, that you would say, I need to go home and either pay to stream it at home or head to the cinema to watch it, what would it be? What's been your favourite, Siobhan?
Marty Supreme has certainly been a big favourite of mine. I think I Swear is certainly one that British audiences have really been enjoying. It was well received critically here. It's not out in America. It's not part of the Oscar contention, partly because it hasn't been released in America yet. They're really waiting to see if it gets some BAFTA heat, and if it does, then maybe word of mouth will carry it over to America. And that's the sort of effect that you can see a BAFTA win having, that, you know, for one battle after another, it's nice to get a BAFTA, but for smaller films, for UK independent movies, it really can drive eyeballs towards a movie that might otherwise get overlooked.
Siobhan, always good to talk. That's Siobhan Sinnott there, a BAFTA voter who was watching the announcement earlier today and film critic. That is it from us for this evening. Thank you for listening. Thank you to the team, and if you were watching, well, thank you. You can continue to watch our coverage on this Road Safety Day on the BBC News NI website. There's a live page there on BBC Newsline. We'll obviously pick up on this as well from 6:30 on BBC One. We're back at the usual time tomorrow, 5 o'clock. Whatever you get up to this evening, do enjoy. Bye bye.